Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Daredevil Born Again Episode 4. We made this breakdown on Easter eggs!
Is that it? Is that your best?
From the return of the Punisher Fright Castle to Matt's colorful vigilante wardrobe to Skrulls, let's break down this episode scene by scene for all the details you missed. And we have been celebrating Daredevil Born Again with some exclusive merch designs at nerdriot.shop and stressing our way through these episodes with these custom pillows, also available on our merch store. Really the best way to support us here at New Rockstars. We open in the morgue on the belongings of Hector Ayala, found on the body at the time of his death. His wallet, smartphone, a knife, keys, watch, wedding ring, and his white tiger mask and tiger amulet. And you'll notice the beads of his necklace include a red, white, and blue pattern, which Hector must have customized as a reference to his Puerto Rican heritage. I know red, white, and blue are the colors on a lot of flags, but come on, the dude wasn't French. I also appreciate that we open this episode with the vigilante mask, just to close with Matt revealing he has 5 vigilante masks. Matt asks the medical examiner about the kill shot, but despite the bullet being potentially custom, no casing was found. Matt senses some footsteps.
How did you get in here?
I want to see my uncle, Hector Ayala.
So this is Hector's niece, whom we saw in the courtroom in episode 3, named Angela del Toro. In the comics, Hector has 2 sisters, Ava Ayala and Awilda Ayala del Toro, and Angela is Awilda's daughter. Angela was introduced in Brian Michael Bendis' Daredevil comics in 2003 as Hector's niece, an FBI agent who ends up taking on the power of the White Tiger from her uncle's amulets when he's falsely accused of murder. Angela is the 4th White Tiger in the comics before her aunt, Hector's sister, Ava, ends up taking on the mantle as the 5th White Tiger after Angela retires. Angela is played by actress Camila Rodriguez. Now, there was another Angela del Toro mentioned in Jessica Jones season 1 episode 6, some private investigator in New York City that we never see. Assuming Marvel plans to confirm all of these shows as MCU canon, this is just one of many logical overlaps, and I guess we can say that that PI was just some other Angela del Toro. But the fact that Angela got into this morgue and the mortician's like, hey, how'd you get in here? It tells us that this girl is already at least pretty skilled or just ballsy, and we should know that with Yusuf Khan set to appear in a later episode, it's very possible that Kamala Khan might show up in this season as well. And since we know that Kamala is building a team of young Avengers or champions in New York City with Kate Bishop, Angela del Toro is yet another hero as a future White Tiger who could be a kid hero in that lineup. As Matt gives Angela his arm, we focus on the White Tiger mask and amulet in the evidence bag as if these items are calling to her. This episode's director, Jeffrey Nachmanoff, told our colleague Brandon Davis that there was an alternate cut of this episode that would have shown the tiger amulet's eyes illuminating when Angela got too close to it. The way she sobs to Matt that she hates the city and the cops and that no one's gonna do anything, she's absolutely being set up to take on this mantle herself. The question now is, could Matt Murdock take on the role as a mentor daddy to these young vigilantes? He already defended the kid in the spider costume that the mayor singled out in his inaugural speech, though I don't know if Matt remembers that that kid was Peter Parker from Queens after Doctor Strange's spell. In our recent Spider-Man 4 video, I speculated that Sadie Sink was cast as Gwen Stacy, and with the possible shout out to Miles Morales in episode 3 with Officer Morales, Jefferson Davis changed his name to Morales in the comics, and it was Morales in Across the Spider-Verse. We could just be getting a lot of young heroes being set up in the orbit of Matt Murdock. We see graffiti of Wilson Fisk that we saw in past episodes with the letters of Muse etched as a signature along the bottom. All the Muse mural artwork on the series was done by David Mack, who's one of the most talented artists who has worked on Daredevil comic titles. He also wrote for Echo and worked on Jessica Jones and Captain America Winter Soldier, and some fun details are in the design here. The left side and then the shirt on the right side and the crown all have an inlay of the backside art of an American $1 bill. The words King and Penn also have that inlay, and the I in King is formed by the Empire State Building. The dollar bill art depiction of the Masonic pyramid is deconstructed in a particular way to match the New York City skyline, which also might be Muse's way of suggesting that he's kind of deconstructing the conspiratorial powers that secretly run the world. Overall, this mural shows the duality of Wilson Fisk, his white-clad, smiling public servant mask, which deceptively winks, and his true, scowling, black-clad, monstrous nature, which Muse has covered in flames, which also connects to the idea of Matt Murdock's world on fire, the way he perceives the violent world that he described to Claire Temple in season 1 of Daredevil. So this right side is the true Wilson Fisk that Matt Murdock sees, and this villainous, violent, cheap day Fisk is the one we end this episode with. We also see the Punisher skull triggered mural that Jessica broke down last week, also signed by Muse in the bottom right. The teeth of the skull are formed by the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, and the Chrysler Building. We have to assume that Bastian just walks these streets and observes everything that's going down, including the corrupt cops cops who reappropriate Frank Castle's sigil as their own symbol to try to justify their killing of vigilantes in cold blood. So Triggered, we should assume, is kind of Bastian Muse's way of mocking those cops for getting too trigger happy when vigilantes or lawyers or the media make them look bad. So Muse, showing an impressive amount of strength, lifts an incapacitated guy down the tracks while watching a passing subway. This is our first look at Bastian's form as Muse this season, and he looks very much like Ron Garney's design in Charles Soule's 2016 Daredevil run, with full body canvas bag covering pinned together, a knit beanie, suspenders, and some bloody eye holes forming tear streaks down the face. The difference here is we can see Bastian's eyes underneath. The Soule Garney run of the comics never reveals what Muse's name is. He's just always kind of a mystery Banksy figure. So for this series to start with Bastian as a stalker figure at Heather Glenn's book reading, and with Heather as a figure in both the orbits of Matt Murdock and of Wilson and Vanessa Fisk, it's just pretty troubling for Heather, right? Also, just imagine being one of those people on that subway car looking out at the passing darkness and then for a flash seeing this guy? Yikes! Between that and Officer Shanahan popping like a circus balloon filled with blood on another train car, I would just start taking taxis. This episode was written by David Feige and Jesse Wigatow. David Feige is not related to Kevin Feige. He's a lawyer, a consultant, and a TV writer on a number of procedural shows who was clearly brought onto the staff to handle all the legalese, which would be why this episode focuses so much on the deterrence legal theory with Leroy stealing the fiddle faddle. That said, several of the scenes in this episode, including everything with Frank Castle, any scenes with Wilson Fisk and Isla Zur, Vanessa Fisk, any scenes with Matt on his rooftop, any scenes with Kirsten McDuffie, and we're pretty sure Fisk's final scene with Adam were all written and all shot after the creative overhaul, and probably not part of the original version of this episode, which might be why episode 4 feels the most stitched together of the episodes we've seen so far. Daniel Blake parties Zemo style with BB Urich and her friend. They urge Daniel to keep partying with them, but Daniel says he has to be in early for Fisk's meeting with a tech company called Clean Green Haulers, which he says has a dope recycling idea to decrease garbage turnout. This, we will see later, is how BB Urich publishes the Mayor Garbage story. In episode 2, I wondered if the reason the Pim Van Dyne Foundation sponsored the New Year's Eve party was part of a bid to shrink the garbage of the city. Maybe this other tech company is another person who put in that bid. Outside, there's a mural dedicated to the White Tiger with vigilante justice written on there. This one is also signed Muse at the bottom. So Muse isn't just calling out the corrupt people. Muse feels bad for the masked vigilantes, and maybe that's how he justifies what he does. BB jokingly calls him Captain Planet, referring to the early 90s pro-environmental kids show that feels more like a reference written by one of these elder millennial writers on the show, rather than a reference an actual 25-year-old would make. Like, be honest, if you're under 25 and you're watching this video, do you know who Captain Planet was? Daniel heads home to the Staten Island ferry. Remember, if you get Staten, you don't need Manhattan, which means that when this kid was younger, his family's commute might have been disrupted by your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, who is involved in one of those ferries being split in half in Spider-Man Homecoming. So maybe he added the shout out to the Spider-Man in Mayor Fisk's speech. We have a really fun transition that takes us across the street through a taxi where we see Leroy is being held for stealing the fiddle faddle. Matt fiddles with his broken Daredevil mask horn on his rooftop, where this episode will end with him training with his batons as he prepares to take back up his Daredevil life. If this rooftop looks kind of like a soundstage to you, it's because it was part of the reshoots that were done later. They just wanted to set up this rooftop setting that Matt ends the episode on, which is why his phone call with McDuffie sending Matt to the Leroy Bradford case is just a little redundant. Kirsten says she's underwater on the Madison case, and it's not a nod to Madison with two Y's, but not where you think. Though I was wondering if the Madison case could be a David Feige lawyer nod to the Madison case in A Few Good Men, which was the landmark integration case that Kathy's dad tried that gave Tom Cruise Kathy such a chip on his shoulder to prove himself in that movie. I only just bring it up because I think anyone who writes legal dramas probably quotes Aaron Sorkin's script for A Few Good Men in their sleep. In couples therapy, Heather Glenn wants to talk to Fisk and Vanessa about this affair with Adam. Oh, poor Adam. Vanessa said that she was drawn to Adam's hands, the way he drew sketches. She said it was like finding a Klee at a garage sale, referring to the Swiss-born German artist Paul Klee in the early 20th century. Maybe it's just because I've been working on a Tenet analysis for the Deep Dive channel for the past 6 months, but I'm reminded of the affair Sater's wife, Kat, has with an artist named Arepo, whom she met during her art appraisal work, an artist whom Sater probably also physically tortured. Vanessa says Adam wasn't part of her husband's world.
What world is that? Politics?
Business.
The fact that they say it together shows that they both have a stake in this crime business, and in fact, Vanessa is really the one calling the shots. Vanessa keeps blaming Fisk for leaving her as he recovered for a few months after Maya Lopez shot him, followed by his trip to Oklahoma, as a reason for her affair, and she connects it with some abandonment issues that she feels from her father going away on business, drinking, gambling, and her judging her mom for her weakness. Fisk says that he did confront Adam. We have seen his bloody knuckles in the past few episodes, but he just says that they had a dialogue. And just as he and Vanessa said business in sync, they answered this question together too.
And where's Adam now?
I don't know.
We get another BB report led with a production clapboard. As Jessica pointed out last week, the date in the lower right corner lists the year as 2024, so they clearly just used a clapboard that they had on set during the reshoot period. The S7 means that this would be season 7 of the BB report series, which is a pretty long run. Well done, BB. Now, the old man being interviewed here says he loves vigilantes. He's the same guy who said a few episodes back that if someone came up to him, he'd take out his piece and shoot them in the head. It kind of reminds me of Nick Fury's dad, that he mentioned in Captain America the Winter Soldier, how he would carry a brown paper bag with him every day. It was just a nice old man, but he would show people what's inside, and there was a loaded gun in there. Matt meets Leroy Bradford, who lets out a few ableist remarks about Matt's blindness before we get this exchange that mentions Fiddle Faddle Camera Corn more times than we have to say a brand's name in a sponsor segment.
5 boxes of Fiddle Faddle caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
Leroy tries to say he paid for the food up front weeks earlier, and then he says this.
Could it have been a Skrull?
Nope.
So just a reminder that this is all happening sometime after the events of Secret Invasion, when then President James Ritson declared war on all extraterrestrials on the planet, including the Skrull shapeshifters. And this is further proof that these scenes with Leroy, I think, were shot back in 2023, the previous version of the show, before Secret Invasion came out, and before Marvel Studios apparently decided to pretend Secret Invasion didn't happen, considering President Ritson didn't come up at all in any of the White House politics in Captain America Brave New World. But the current status of the Skrulls in the MCU was shown in the Marvels film, when the Kree leader Dar-Ben attacked the Skrull colony on Tarnax 4, which was led by Emperor Drogi. Carol, Kamala, and Monica saved some of the Skrulls, and Valkyrie took those survivors to some safe haven. If that haven was New Asgard on Earth, it would have been an open defiance of President Ritson's order, and considering other New Asgard residents like Light Elves were causing legal issues in the She-Hulk series, it wouldn't surprise me if Matt came across the Skrulls in his work too. I just gotta hand it to Leroy for thinking a Skrull would pose as him, then grab 5 boxes of Fiddle Faddle where he was on camera, and then when he wasn't on camera, plant those boxes on him for the security guard and the cops to find. Matt meets the prosecutor, Sofija Ozola. Now, there was a woman named Sofija of Hell's Kitchen, a Serbian national with a violent militant background in the 2010 Black Panther: The Man Without Fear run. I don't know if this Latvian American prosecutor is based on her. The two of them debate deterrence, which Matt calls a discredited penal philosophy. According to the National Institute of Justice, prison sentences are unlikely to prevent future crimes, and various studies have shown that minimum sentencing guidelines have led to excessive incarceration rates that are really just designed to fatten the bottom lines for these for-profit prisons across this country, and this policy doesn't really stop criminals from committing future crimes. Still, it's pretty wild for Matt to try to argue the whole basis of the American criminal justice system over one case of Fiddle Faddle theft, especially a guy who mocked him repeatedly for being blind before Leroy had his sad monologue about being hungry. But I think that just shows how ardent of a litigator and how big-hearted of a spirit of the law fighter that Matt is. I bet his devil ears heard Leroy's tummy rumbling. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Relationships are complicated, all of them, even the good ones, especially the good ones. Navigating any relationship takes a lot of work and a lot of introspection. If you find yourself stuck in a pattern of pulling away when somebody starts to get close or feeling jealous of your partner's friends, that's going to get in the way of meaningful relationships that could otherwise be enriching your life. That's something therapy can help with, and our sponsor BetterHelp can help you get started. Instead of being stuck in an endless loop of questioning yourself, you can talk through relationship concerns with someone who's trained to help you find real answers. BetterHelp has made starting therapy as easy as taking a quiz. Just fill out a questionnaire and you will match with a therapist in as little as a couple days. Easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost if it's not the right fit. They carefully make sure therapists on the platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Going to therapy is a sign of strength, not weakness. There are so many kinds of relationships that can be improved by therapy, not just romantic ones. Click the link in the description, scan the QR code, or go to betterhelp.com/newrockstars and get 10% off your first month of therapy. Matt mentions it's Latvian Heritage Day to set up the event that Fisk goes to later. Now, Latvian Heritage Day isn't a known, recognized holiday in New York City of our world. There are other holidays that Latvian Americans celebrate. He says that he smelled the honey cake on her breath. He also charms Sofija by saying the term for the crime, petit larceny, comes from the French petit, meaning little. And you start talking French, you know what you're trying to get with that. And as Matt walks away, you can see Sofija's eyes lowering to check him out, like hating to see him leave, but loving to see him walk away. way. As Matt demonstrated when he sparred Jen Walters in Los Angeles, we are seeing kind of the 1-2 punch of Matt Murdock's legal expertise. Perry Mason by day, Cherry Baston by night. Matt passes Officer Powell, the cop who testified against Hector Ayala. Powell's face mostly healed since the last episode. Powell says everyone in his family wears a badge, and Matt hears Powell's heart beating true as Powell says he had nothing to do with Ayala's death. Still a dirtbag though. Fisk brings Daniel, Buck, and Sheila out to the port in the Red Hook area of Brooklyn, saying New York City has long neglected industrial development. He has a model showing a number of shipping cranes, and fun fact, shipping cranes like these in the Oakland port and San Francisco Bay Area are what inspired the artists on George Lucas's team for the Empire Strikes Back designs of the AT-ATs. Really what Fisk seems to be trying to do by revitalizing the shipping center in Red Hook is to expand his own Fisk shipping interests to international and bi-coastal ports, especially after Maya Lopez bombed his Brooklyn train yard and shipping center in the Echo series. Sheila wants to slow play the project and go through all the proper channels and the red tape, while Daniel is ready to fast track it. Buck stays behind to update Fisk on the drama among the 5 families that we saw playing out in episode 3, saying that the problems in Red Hook will continue until the heads are sentenced or they die. And since those 5 families roll up to Vanessa, I assume this is going to lead to some further strains between Fisk and his wife. Leroy says that even a 10-day sentence is too much because the last time he did time, he missed his appointment for food stamps and he had to resort to eating from dumpsters. And he brings up a really good point about the economic absurdity of defunding social welfare programs versus continuing public funding for prisons.
They're willing to spend 5 times more to lock me up than they're willing to spend to feed me.
So I know hearing so much about the fiddle faddle caramel corn sounded petty in this episode, but it has to be a seemingly petty larceny issue so that we can see why such a small thing would matter so much to someone. So here's where the episode takes a turn, and we cut abruptly to Mayor Fisk sitting in a classroom, George Bush reading My Pet Goat style, to these school kids singing Starship's 1985, "We built this city." What? So Starship is having a moment right now. They just used this same song in Paradise on Hulu, and their other big song, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, was just featured in the Super Bowl trailer for Thunderbolts. And both Hulu and Disney Plus are of course owned by Disney, so I'm sure it was just like a company-wide license buyout. But at first I found it insane that an elementary school would have their kids singing a Starship song, followed by a Latvian group singing the same song in Latvian, until, those of us at New Rockstars are kind of brainstorming that it might have been Mayor Fisk's campaign song, kind of like what YMCA was for Trump's 2024 campaign. I will say that Starship's song is one of the lesser mid-80s nostalgic rock ballads that were trying to pay respect to the roots of rock and its importance to all of American culture. Its music video is completely nonsensical and stupid. I think the track was used here to show how Fisk thinks he is building an elaborate city, but having no sense of what foundation that city was built on. Like he fashions himself a Fiorello LaGuardia, but he is not. Meanwhile, Daniel shows Sheila the blog that BB Urich wrote about what Daniel told her at the club the night before, with the headline, "Mayor Garbage, a Union Buster." So when you read this article, you see that BB's angle is that by cutting the red tape and working with big tech, Fisk is disrupting the sanitation unions, and you can't be anti-union. And I love this. The article says published at 5:47 a.m. And Daniel later says that he was out until 4:30 or 5. So that means BB must have literally rushed home, wrote up this article, probably half drunk, before she went to bed. Like if she wrote it and then set it to publish, like scheduling the post, she would not have scheduled it for 5:47. She would have scheduled it for like 6 o'clock. I'm telling you, as someone who has run online digital publishing and content management systems. So it's amazing that BB got this up with 0 typos. Also, the thumbnail art for this article shows a bunch of rubble, and it looks like New York City's Flatiron Building, which was the building used for the Daily Bugle in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films. The rubble is piled pretty high. It could be like a stock image from the Battle of New York. I also like that circle with Fisk using some New Rockstars thumbnail design principles there. Also, I'm sorry to do this, but if this is Lincoln Middle School, why do some of these kids look 13 and other kids look like they're 7-year-olds who wandered in from the elementary school across the street? Now, if you are one of these child actors watching this video, it is not your fault. You sing like an angel. Well done. But the casting team of the show clearly didn't give this much thought. And of course, as with any group shot of children, inevitably half of them are looking directly into the camera. Like, check this out. We got these 2 girls who are like, "Dada, look, I tied my own shoes." And then you got this kid who's like, "I'm in driver's ed." Look, I get it. In school choirs, you do mixed grades sometimes, but just some of these kids are way too young for middle school. Also, they place Mayor Fisk in the tiniest chair, which I know sometimes you do for the photo op. Clearly, this chair is smaller than all the other chairs in this room that the adults are sitting in, and smaller than any chair any average middle schooler would sit in. This is clearly a kindergartner's chair. So it's kind of like the middle school was like, "Quick, get the smallest chair you can find so our mayor feels like a giant giant sitting in it. Elementary school across the street. Bring one of your tiny chairs for Mayor Fatass. When Mayor Fisk stands to clap, they keep the camera at a low angle, making him look towering.
Now for our next one.
No. That's fine.
And now I'm dying to know what the next song was gonna be. Kind of like, and now, Mr. Mayor, this random group of 6-year-olds and 13-year-olds will sing Foreigners, I Want to Know What Love Is. I've gotta take a little time. Fisk gets the hell away from this school, going to the Latvian Cultural Center because Sheila says Latvian Americans are an important voting bloc in New York City. For reference, there are only about 8,000 Latvians living in New York City, a city with a population of over 8 million people, making that a 1/10 of 1%. By comparison, there are nearly 600,000 Puerto Ricans living in New York City, comprising about 6.7% of the population. But that didn't stop Mayor Fisk from encouraging people to gun down Hector Ayala from the Heights. So, priorities. Sheila, get it together. But this Latvian cultural group sings We Built This City in Latvian. Fisk cannot escape what is widely considered one of the worst rock songs. I'm not afraid to say it. It's catchy, but it makes no sense. I don't know why the Latvians are so important in this episode. My thinking is that maybe the Latvians are one of the 5 families, and that this could all be setting up a gang conflict later. I hope that's the case. We should also note that some scenes in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier were set in Latvia. To be clear, this is not a Latveria thing. Latveria is a fictional country that's actually implied to be in a different part of Europe than the Baltic states. I also know that actor Mark Geller was credited in this episode as Carlos Urbe, who was the first bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Latvia in the 1920s. His name caught my eye because Mark Geller is also the actor who plays the mysterious Lumen Company founder Keir Egan on Severance. So I'm just wondering if there was more to this Latvian Heritage Day subplot that was removed from the episode during reshoots, but that they still had to credit Geller. Something weird was going on here, folks. But the screaming that Mayor Fisk wishes he could have unleashed on the kids or at the Latvian Cultural Center, he now just blasts at his staff.
Mayor garbage! Is that it? Is that your best?
Actually, if you take Fisk's grammar literally there, he's almost screaming at himself. But Daniel owns up to being the source of the leak, saying that he was out till around 5 with BB taking tequila and ketamine. And maybe it's just Daniel admitting that he doesn't deserve this job, and Fisk feeling that he's getting his fill of boy slapping with Adam, that he suddenly shifts to compartmentalizing his anger and forgiving Daniel. As we'll see at the end of this episode, he admits that forgiveness is a form of love in his deluded worldview, but he does place his hand on the shoulder in the same kind of threatening gesture that Bane does to Ben Mendelsohn in The Dark Knight Rises. Fisk says,
In the fullness of time, you'll make a better man.
The fullness of time actually comes from Galatians. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Some believe that Daniel Blake could be being set up on the show as a figure similar to Richard Fisk, the Rose, Wilson and Vanessa's son in the comics. Now, throughout this episode, we have been seeing garbage bags piling up on the sidewalk of New York, which isn't entirely uncommon in New York City, but now this BB report interstitial confirms it is a result of Mayor Fisk's conflict with the sanitation workers union. Matt returns to the place Hector was gunned down and uses his hearing to track an empty bottle of scotch rolling down the hill to the sewer gutter where anything on this path would have rolled, and so that's where he finds the custom bullet casing of the bullet that killed Hector. Then we get some generic established shots of New York, which seem to be being used in the editing here as visual buffers to transition us into this new sequence that seems to be inserted into the episode after the reshoots. I only mention it because the bullet casing in the earlier shot does not seem to have the Punisher skull logo on it when Matt finds it in the sewer, but it does very clearly when he shows it to Frank. But we see Matt passing an outdoor security camera and then takes this elevator where he's being reflected in a mirror that probably also has a security camera behind it. Matt follows some utility tunnels, passing this sign for telephone company personnel from Knickerbocker Village Management. So this tells us that Frank Castle lives in the basement beneath Knickerbocker Village, which is a housing development in New York's Two Bridges area on the Lower East Side. The notes of John Paisano's theme from the Netflix era return as Matt approaches this room. And just hearing that music is a bit of table setting to gear us up for the return of Frank Castle, the Punisher, Jon Bernthal, who we should note first joined Charlie Cox, Matt Murdock on screen on March 18th, 2016, when the 13 episodes of Daredevil Season 2 hit Netflix. So with this episode of Daredevil Born Again coming out on March 18th, 2025, it makes it 9 years to the day since that moment. I broke down Frank Castle's journey in our preseason recap video, but basically, since offing his enemies from his Black Ops team, Cerberus, including William Rollins, Ray Schoonover, and Billy Russo, Frank Castle has been embracing his moniker as the Punisher Punisher, never fully having gotten over the murders of his family and allowing himself to cross that moral line that Matt Murdock refuses to cross, to kill violent murderers, to send a message to anyone else who might try to do that. Matt, as an attorney, defended Frank Castle in Frank's murder trial in Daredevil Season 2, but Frank owned up to doing what he did, and he ended up getting sentenced and sent to prison, and then fought Wilson Fisk in prison, which then led to a prison riot where Frank was able to escape, and Frank, having deduced that Matt was the Red that he had been fighting on the roofs of Hell's Kitchen, returned the favor to Red by sniping some warriors of the Hand at the end of Season 2. The new head writer that Marvel Studios brought in to creatively overhaul this series was Dario Scardapane, who wrote on the Punisher series on Netflix, so this scene was really where he was able to shine. We see Frank taking some meds, suggesting he's doing a better job trying to control his anger. As he takes these pills, we see he has this patch on his arm. This is a Marine Raider Battalion patch. The Marine Raiders originally fought in the Pacific in World War II before they were decommissioned in 1943, but they were actually recommissioned as the Marine Corps Special Operations Regiment in 2006. Originally 86 Marines handpicked from the Elite Marine Force Recon, which was actually the group Frank Castle was reported to have served with in the backstory of the Netflix era shows. In 2014, this regiment was renamed the Marine Raiders in honor of the World War II Marines. This patch is depicted with a skull on a diamond surrounded by 5 stars. Matt shows Frank that the bullet casing has the skull logo. Now, for a bullet casing to have anything like this on it, and for Matt to be able to feel its texture, it would have had to have been either etched or just like burned through a brand perhaps onto the casing, and it would be very risky to tamper with a live round like that, so presumably this was done with an empty casing before that empty casing was refilled with the gunpowder and the bullet projectile. And I'm just saying that it's a lot of trouble to go through this, and that the cops who use bullets like this really wanted to send a message, especially if this casing rolled down a hill into a gutter. They wanted even Pennywise down there to know who did this. Frank says that the bullet must have belonged to some bullshit fanboy, and Matt says that, you could use your guns and your hardware to be of service, and using the word service really triggers Frank here.
Were you of service, Red? Did you serve? You pranced around the city in a Halloween costume, beating the snot out of bad guys. Hey, thank you for your service.
He calls him Red again. This kind of hostility recalls their arguing on the roof in Daredevil Season 2, where Frank sees himself as a soldier currently in wartime and thus justified in his killing. In the back of this room is a wall of targets with several of them X'd out, showing that Frank is still on that warpath of killing murderers that he finds. I want to say the one closest to him in this shot might have been Billy Russo, but Billy Russo also just kind of has a generic look that a lot of Frank's probable targets have, and the image directly above that guy's face shows a dead body in a bathtub, like Joe Russo's character in Civil War, and being in a bathtub is not how Billy Russo was left in Punisher Season 2. Frank taunts that he thinks Matt didn't come here for Frank's help, but rather for his permission to lay his hands on someone.
You're guilty. Excuse me? Yeah. That guilt, that shame, that's my home, Red.
I think we can look at this great scene as Matt finally going to a kind of Catholic confession, because since Father Lantom died in Daredevil Season 3, and now after Foggy has died, Matt has had no spiritual confidant to confess his sins to, and because he can't go to confession, he can't go to communion as a devout Catholic. Frank accuses Matt of overtrusting the system. This episode is titled Sic Semper Systema, which is a play on the Marine phrase of Sic Semper Fidelis, or often shortened as Semper Fi, meaning always faithful. Sic Semper Systema would mean thus always to the system, as in you're always relying on the man-made systems to take care of you, even when those systems are so prone to failure. We're also reminded of the phrase Sic Semper Tyrannus, thus always to tyrants, the phrase attributed to Brutus in the assassination of Julius Caesar, and the Virginia State motto shouted by John Wilkes Booth upon shooting President Lincoln at Ford's Theater in 1865. Also interesting that it was at Lincoln Middle School where Fisk had to endure his hatred of systems in this episode. Sic Semper Tyrannus is a rallying cry against the abuse of power and a promise that tyrants will always get their comeuppance. So, thus always to systems could be a phrase that applies to what Matt Murdock and what Wilson Fisk realized this episode, that trying to walk the noble path and trusting the system will always disappoint you, and to really get things done, you have to bypass and break down that system. However, our favorite Latin expert on Twitter, who helped us out so much during Agatha, pointed out that a technically accurate Latin version of thus always to systems would actually be Sic Semper Systemati. Sic Semper Systema is really closer to the system is always like this, which I think is just another way of looking at how the systems of New York are always broken and unchangeable. So why even bother playing by those rules? Frank says this is really all about Foggy, and he urges Matt to say his name, coward, and then he finally gets Matt to break down.
He talks to you, doesn't he? Hear his voice. Every time I start moving, I still hear my little boy. I see see him.
Now, it has been confirmed that Eldon Henson will return for Daredevil Born Again Season 2, and I think this, plus flashbacks, might be how, as a ghostly presence occupying Matt's mind, the voice of his conscience. Now, I know there was a numerical Easter egg in episode 1 hinting at the theory that Foggy Nelson might have faked his death. I just think Foggy would be a more powerful presence as just this voice and vision that Frank in this scene is describing. Frank says that Bullseye gets to line up at the chow line in prison and breathe the same air that Matt does, and Matt rages,
He got life! How about old Foggy? He got life.
Frank twists the word life from being a sentence to just being a blessing, an opportunity. After Matt leaves, Frank looks off to the side, suddenly overwhelmed with emotion. I love this little nonverbal choice by Jon Bernthal because it's like he's seeing and hearing his son Frank Jr. in this room, meaning that Matt's final words about Foggy being more decent than they could ever be is what stopped Frank in his tracks, stopped him moving long enough to hear his ghost son's voice. And what did that ghost son say? We built this city. I'm just kidding. He's like, go get him, Dad, as in go after and help this guy, Dad. And we will know Frank will return in a future episode based off of some set photos. So we're going to be getting some more punishment this season. We catch up with Fisk and Vanessa. Now, last episode, they sat at opposite ends of the dinner table, kind of like the sequence in Citizen Kane that showed the disillusion of Charles Foster Kane's marriage. Now they're sitting closer together. And Fisk says,
when I was a boy, I learned by watching my father.
He said the thing! Now I was hoping he would say exactly what he told Dex in Daredevil Season 3.
Say something!
When I was a boy, I beat my father's skull in with a hammer.
Fisk said that he learned from his father how to move men's minds and break their bodies, but he did not learn forgiveness. That's something he learned from Vanessa. Matt catches up with Heather.
You ever feel like you're pushing a rock up a hill? And there's a bunch of people on the other side pushing it back.
He's referring to the Greek mythological Sisyphus, and also perhaps the hill the bottle and the bullet casing rolled down. How the forces of gravity in the city are even working against him. If only the city wasn't built on rock and roll. After a trip to Pound Town with Heather, Matt ascends to the roof while Fisk descends to his lair as we hear a church organ arrangement of John Pisano's theme via the Newton brothers. Fisk passes the rabbit in the snowstorm painting. That's the painting that symbolized the crumbling wall of his childhood home that young Wilson would have to stand and stare at while his father abused his mother. The painting that made adult Fisk feel so alone and the first thing he bonded with Vanessa over. This painting still has the spatter of blood that stained it in the final episode of Season 3 when it hung in the presidential hotel and Bullseye and Matt and Fisk all got in that bloody brawl. Meanwhile, Matt's prized exhibit is a collection of 5 masks. We saw a straight on shot of these in the January trailer. Let's break down what these are. The first on the far right seems to be his textured red mask that he was wearing in episode 1 of the season, but this has the broken horn repaired. Maybe this is a backup mask. He did have the broken horn in an earlier scene on the rooftop, so I don't think he would have had time to repair it. Next, this black or very dark maroon one to the left of it. It's my favorite. It reminds me of his black suit that we saw Matt wearing in the animated Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man when he was also voiced by Charlie Cox, though that was in a different universe. This black mask could be inspired by the black armor in Daredevil 321 or the black suit from the Shadowland storyline. Now the gold one in the middle is the throwback yellow and red design that he was wearing in Los Angeles and She-Hulk. Then a smoother red mask that I assume is the one he was wearing at the end of Daredevil Season 1 and throughout Daredevil Season 2. And then closest to us on the far left is a gray or bluish mask that I had some trouble identifying. As Matt uncovers his batons, we match cut to Wilson's carb-heavy dinner uncovered, ziti and sausage with peppers, a far cry from the one asparagus and egg white omelet that he ate in episode 1. And we see the recipient of Fisk's bloody knuckles, poor Adam, imprisoned behind bars in this lair, just watching as Fisk dines. Adam is played by actor Lou Taylor Pucci, who actually co-starred with Vincent D'Onofrio in the 2005 film Thumbsucker when they were father and son, and it's just kind of weird that now they're fighting over the same woman. The sounds of Fisk's fork and Adam rattling the bars and Matt's chain on the rooftop all mixed together, and we cut to black on Matt flinging that weapon directly at us, reminding us of his fight with Nobu at the end of Season 1, and then after a few seconds of black, we cut to the rattling of the passing subway cars. Muse carries his victim to his own lair that's filled with bloody artwork. We see one figure screaming with a crown over his head, like the crown that covered Wilson's head. Maybe this crown is how he identifies his future victims. And we see the letters M, U, and S, and E in print above, and then scratched by hand below, this figure's eyes seem to be gouged out, which reminds me of what Muse does to Blind Spot in the comics. The second painting we see is a similar figure, but we see the words "the true," is it voice or victim? It just reminds me of how Matt and Frank were arguing over who the real victim is, right? And how Frank was so offended that Matt put the word victim in his mouth. But this victim sees a few corpses hanging from hooks, a woman wearing heels, another corpse to her right, and I think that's a third victim on the far right of frame. And then Muse jams a plug and a hose into this guy's body, draining him of his blood, and this will be the paint that Muse has been using for all of his artwork. Which makes me wonder, did Muse use blood in some part in the White Tigers tribute mural, or does he only use blood for other types of artwork? And the specific brighter red shading of the blood here just reminds me of the bloody ooze that covered all the surfaces in New York City in the original Netflix era run of the show. Comment down below with your thoughts on this episode. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all the channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.